you're back from break, and I wasn't trying to like be harsh before when I started the video, like at the time. It was just to model how, I mean, having these things before I start, you know, your warm-up or school lessons or after a synapse, after a break, when they first come in the morning, not only did it quickly make a difference in me getting their attention when I needed it, but I knew it was working when the following year after I'd had students, they'd come to my room first to see what was going up, and other teachers would say, what are you doing with my students? But they really are engaged and want to see what's going on. Okay, so here's your post-lunch one. Okay, object permanence, very important, from the Onion. All right, so here we are, the emotional switching station. Things got through the attention filter. And so now they have the information that you successfully got in, needs to stick around to make it to the prefrontal cortex for memory and executive function access. So here's a little illustration reminding you that prefrontal cortex, about 20% of the brain, is the high-end real estate. Information must get there to become memory, and there must be access from the executive functions there to the rest of the brain if the executive functions, top-down attention, emotional self-management, if they're going to be successful in the ones that are growing, if they're going to have any command over the brain's output behavior, they've got to have access. And it all comes down to the amygdala. We'll talk about it. Krashen called it the affective filter. Let's find out the rules of it, because one on each side in the limbic system, deep in the temporal lobe, are these little almond-shaped structures called the amygdala. Now the good news is they're switching stations, like at a train yard, meaning that if the information gets there, it will go someplace in the brain. The problem is, where will it go? The high brain, the low brain? Where will access be? And the biggest impactor on that switch in the amygdala is stress. Stress impacts the amygdala and can have significantly negative consequences for learning because it makes the amygdala a blockade. So in another illustration, if this was a scan, like an fMRI scan, I think I'll probably be showing you one, but just to give you a sense, on a neuroimaging scan, we can tell what area is active because the cells are using more glucose and more oxygen. So that's what we see in parts of the scans that we measure. Oh, there's more getting through the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, or oh, it's being blocked. We don't see any activity there. We also correlate it to what's remembered and behavior. In any case, if this was a scan, an average scan of somebody without high stress, there wouldn't be anything major standing out in terms of a hot zone, cells that are really highly metabolic, using lots of oxygen and glucose. Everything would be relatively normal, or relatively like close to the same color range, intensity, without high stress. So here you have that attention filter where information comes in, then it hits this amygdala right here. And in a non-high stress state, it can go pass through the amygdala and go to the prefrontal cortex. Very nice. Similarly, information or skill sets from the executive functions, prioritizing, organizing, delay of gratification, all those nice things, without the amygdala, when it's in its normal state, that export from the prefrontal cortex can travel through the amygdala and direct behavior and output in the rest of the brain. We have the reflective executive functions, we have memory, all nice. Now, in sustained or repetitive high stress, and this is through mammals including humans, we start seeing changes in the amygdala. With high stress, we start seeing more and more metabolic activity, more oxygen use, more glucose use. But what we see on the scan is in the region of the amygdala, lots of activity is going on, and it becomes like a stop sign or a red light. We lose access in to the prefrontal cortex, and the input is deflected to the lower reactive brain, so we no longer have construction of long-term memory, and we also lose the executive function, output, top-down control, which is now in the involuntary lower brain. That's a very powerful amygdala. What happens when the control shifts to the lower brain? In mammals in the wild, we have only reactive behavior, fight, flight, and freeze. It's involuntary. The animal doesn't have a choice. Think about, should I do the flight now? Or it's just programmed automatic survival. Humans, similar to the intake reticular activating system attention filter, the human amygdala is very close to that of animals in the wilds, but it is more evolved. It can be a little more discriminating. It doesn't just go to fight, flight, freeze, but we see versions of them. Fight could be an acting out. Freeze could be zoning out, or flight could be any number of things. So the behaviors that we see when the amygdala is in that high stress state are just like the animal's survival. They are involuntary, not chosen, not because a kid is bad or a sociopath. It's the brain in its survival mode, shooting input to the low brain and reacting out of the low brain. So we see how the rules are of the amygdala. We see something that sets it off. So what are the experiences relevant to learning in a classroom, type of learning, but learning situations that are most associated with us seeing the amygdala get there? Certainly there are things outside of class. Certainly kids come to our classrooms with their amygdala at a 10 out of 10 red zone. We'll address that, but let's talk about things if they come to the class, once they're in the classroom, what are the things that we're responsible for or we can impact that have high input or influence on the state of the amygdala, whether it's a stop sign or not. Turns out there are things that many people think, oh, get over it. Boredom and frustration. I mean, this is the main thing that I wanted to do when I left neurology to become a teacher. I wanted people to understand that the reactive state is the brain doing what it's programmed to do. And what was doing it physiologically, I mean, on a scanner, we could see that was not, oh, get over yourself, don't be so lazy, or try harder. These are physiologic states that promote red zone amygdala. Most frequently, boredom associated with mastery. I already know it, but the teacher's still teaching it and making me do homework, like a whole class experience for someone who already knows it. It's not 1 minute that will turn the amygdala into a blockade, sustained or repeated or expected. Low personal relevance. I mean, we talk about it's good to be personally relevant. It was one of the things you included in your list of great learning. But when it's low for sustained or repeated time, the amygdala goes in the red zone. Frustration, repeated failures to achieve a goal. Anything that's expected of students in the learning situations, or that they expect of themselves or their parents expect of themselves, that repeated failure to achieve that goal, more and more likely the amygdala is each time more and more likely to go into the red zone sooner. And it doesn't mean just when someone fails to be able to give an oral report or to fail certain tests. It's equally as stressful and amygdala freezing when it's someone who gets A's in all their subjects, and every time it's this type of assignment or this topic, they keep getting B's. So repeated failure to achieve whatever understanding or goal that they've been trying for will put the brain into the automatic stress state. So real things and long-term can cause problems. The pathways change. Everything can be reversed, but these are really big deals. Now, in addition to this, too hard, too easy brain that's going to go in the stress state, we have another programming in all brains. Has to do with survival. Here's the deal. The brain weighs 3 pounds, and it uses 20% of all the critical survival materials, oxygen and glucose and nutrients. Little thing, biggest demand. It's the most high usage organ in the body. We've seen that you have brain death, but the other organs are good, and you can be an organ donor. After 3 to 4 minutes without oxygen or glucose, brain cells die and are not reproduced again. So makes sense that for survival, the animal in the species, such a high demand organ, is programmed not to waste it. Its fallback, its programming is preserve resources. So its system is not to put out the energy, not to put out the mental effort and energy that's going to use the limited resources unless it's for survival or it expects something good. So we have the two problems: a brain that's really not programmed to get off the couch unless it expects something good or survival, and a brain that's going to get in the stress state and limit its function and behavior when it's too hard or too easy. So it needs the Goldilocks zone and a reason to get off the couch. Starts seeming to me like this is a ridiculous system, but until you think that it's an evolutionary process in mammals. Look about in terms of the getting off the couch or putting in effort when it doesn't work. And if you're an animal in the wild, like that little fox, and periodically the mouse runs by, something you can chase after and eat for breakfast. Well, if that little fox had 3 hills around where it lived, and 2 of them were normal hills with normal brush, one was incredibly steep and had dense underbrush. So every time the rabbit would put in the effort and run up that hill to chase something on the steep underbrush hill, it wouldn't catch it. The mouse would just scoot under the brush. So repeatedly, it would fail to achieve its goal on that hill. Well, the brain, they're not coming home and keeping a checklist or a chart or getting graded, but the brain is programmed in terms of this survival in humans and in animals, but it makes so much sense when you think of the animal. The brain is keeping track. I failed that, don't put any more effort into it. So repeated failure to get the prey when it's going up the steep hill blocks the output of that effort. So it automatically starts cutting back and stops going up that hill. A great system for survival in the wild. Huge problem in students because low expectation of success. Our brains are programmed to keep track of effort that pays off and doesn't, and programmed to withhold further effort when there's been repeated failure to achieve a goal, and we get the fixed mindset. So what seems like that's too bad about our brains makes total sense for survival. So hopefully I presented 2 huge problems. Too hard, too easy, must be in the Goldilocks zone. And here's a brain that's programmed not to get off the couch. Big problems, so you'll want to know what I have to teach because it's interventions. So let's go, though, first summarizing, because this is good, important stuff. Stress from low personal relevance, sustained boredom or frustration, blocks flow through the amygdala. As a result, decreased access into the prefrontal cortex, decreased memory. We also have the input going to the lower reactive brain, with the output being involuntary, fight, flight, freeze, act out, zone out. And we have the repeated failure to achieve a goal, brain keeping track of it, and ultimately building the fixed mindset and withholding further effort. So you might get a student and say, this is a totally different approach. I know it's been hard for you in the past. If it's one of these things that it's repetitively been unsuccessful, your words won't be enough, but we'll get there. We haven't not said a word about interventions. Just want you to understand the issue, the problem, the challenge, and it's great if you can think about how you could explain this to others, because as I said, parents, students, other teachers, colleagues have misimpressions that if a student is acting out or zoning out or not putting in the effort, it's by choice. It's laziness. It's not intelligence. It's distractibility. That it just, and the students believe it too. So they're getting the fixed mindset, and they're getting people saying, you're not trying hard enough, or you're not smart. So they're getting a lot of messages that will make it even harder for them to buy in to put in some effort. So for this synapse, let's do a quick write, which, raise your hand if you're familiar with quick writes. Okay, good. Some that don't. It's a great strategy when you're assigning a writing assignment, narrative or expository, and they don't have anything to write about. But it brings ideas to mind. But we're going to do it in a different manner. So here's the topic, and I'll explain how it works. Topic is, well, the one I'm suggesting, you can pick your own, how stress impacts learning and behavior. I'll put back that slide, summary slide. Here's the procedure of a quick write. Keep your pen, pencil, or keyboard continuously moving for 2 minutes. Don't stop for anything, not for editing, not for, if you have no idea what to write, just keep writing the last phrase that you wrote over and over and over until something pops in your head. And no need for punctuation, spelling, grammar, editing, because this is not going to be handed in or read out loud. It's just going to work. So I'll put back the prompt, and my one option is when you're doing this quick write, it could be a quick write, like a draft of a letter that you might be writing to a student or a colleague, somebody in your relevant audience, explaining to them about the rules of the amygdala, and perhaps explaining why their behavior becomes reactive when they're stressed. However you want to include it, what you're going to do with it afterwards is just find a gold nugget. So there's nothing, nobody's going to see it, and it's fine if you just write the last phrase over and over. So take a look before we start, just look at the prompt, look at the summary of the information about the amygdala, and I will leave this up here and tell you when I'm going to start the 2-minute countdown. Any questions first? You need paper and pencil or computer. Okay, let's begin. I'll tell you when 1 minute remains. Start writing. Finish up your sentence or your thought. Again, nothing you're going to hand in. But here's what you will do. You've written something. What you're going to do now is find a gold nugget. Sometimes when you do it with students, you have them find several. I usually would do that, but you can find several if you want. But highlight or underline or somehow designate what you think is the gold nugget. Like when you're panning for gold, there's a whole lot of junk that goes through the sieve, but you might be left with a gold nugget or two. So you can highlight your gold nuggets and select one of them that you will read out to your group. It could just be a phrase, a word, or you certainly do not have to do it. But so take 3 minutes to both highlight your nugget. And when I have students highlight their nuggets, those things are going to take with them as they continue the project. So highlight your nuggets or nugget, find one and share with your group. So I'll only tell you when it's the final minute of sharing. As soon as you've found your nugget to share, you can share it with your group. The amygdala's response to emotions. We did the science research. How does the research relate to learners? And then after the break, it will be more specific under the 3 categories. We'll talk about strategies. But now you're going to get more, it'll be interventions, but we'll see how it works with what the brain does. Promoting transfer of input through the emotional filter is what our goal is now. What, in general, strategies and interventions, whereas specific strategies after break. So here's the problem. We have to avoid the emotional blockade if we're going to keep learning happening. It's okay if it's short or brief or but we can't have it keep going. The 3 major components, which you certainly would come up with on your own: climate, feeling safe that your person, your property, and your feelings will not be harmed. Students learning top-down self-management, similar to the way we talked about building their attentional focus, top-down control to tell the intake attention filter what to do, building their self-management. And the one I'll spend the most time on, because the first 2 are equally important, but I'll be more specific with that whole Goldilocks zone, because we need instructional strategies to engage all learners. Mastery, low foundation, and what are some ways to do that? Because now we see that it causes behavior problems, learning problems, and impacts everybody. So, briefly, not conclusive about the positive climate and strong relationships because it is critical. But again, don't think because we're not discussing it, it's not equally important. The other second one was building their top-down emotional self-management, self-control. We know that the pathways are developing, these executive functions are developing in their prefrontal cortex. And you've helped them build them stronger and stronger. Age is helping them do that. We'll talk about how we can do it further. But we need to be able to have those strategies, the interventions, the awareness, the management, be able to get to the amygdala. So they have to know them. They have to be able to facilitate and use what they know. And with that, it won't be too late. The amygdala will not so frequently get a little bit stressed. Oh, I can't do this, or I haven't done this before successfully, or this is boring. We'll talk about the things so they're aware and they can help it before it hits the red zone. So for example, emotion identifying as they enter class. I also won't be spending a lot of time on what you do for the students who are coming in the stressed out state, which can be horrible. The things that are happening at home, they haven't eaten for days, they're wearing the same clothes, they didn't shower, they smell bad, their pants are too tight, their best friend just said, I'm not your friend anymore, they didn't get invited to the party. All of these things, and worse, they're coming to you with. So one of the couple of things that make that change, drop them from a 10 to an 8, or a 9 to a 7. And if it drops, even if they're running at a high level, coming into your classroom or your office and having built up that trust, that confidence in you, the drop even of a little bit, 2 from a 10 to an 8, will open up their amygdala because it will respond. All right, so here's one that doesn't take any time significantly and is powerful for all ages. There's a emotion chart. It doesn't have to be babyish. It could be fancy words, bigger words, or it could be emojis. But when they enter class, they identify their emotion. They don't announce it to the class. You're standing by the emotion chart. They just are coming in and saying a word and telling you what they're feeling. That's it. There's no intervention. There's nothing announced. As a result of that, they feel cared about. That's a big deal. And you respond appropriately. If they're telling you, I just saw somebody get beaten up, or my dog just died, well, you're going to respond appropriately by not putting them on the spot or yelling at them when they don't have their homework, or if they're talking to a neighbor, or if they're drinking water 6 times. They're going to know that they're cared about because you've listened and you're responding appropriately. Also, though, this is getting into the top-down control. Simply naming their emotion, naming how they're feeling, sort of gets the prefrontal cortex, gets the executive functions on a better alert system. When there's to name how you're feeling, even to identify a name or a face, activates the prefrontal cortex and lets it do some top-down. So it's significant to do that. But we certainly want them to build top-down regulation that they can use anytime without other people knowing it. I'll talk more about the place of pillows under the computer bank, but how can they build their self-management in ways where they can use it when they need it? Well, the first thing they have to do, again, thanks to these questions, is recognize what they're feeling. Now, the emotion wall helps it, but we want them they can get even more out of it. There's lots of mindfulness programs where you can do it. You can simply download an emoji chart from the internet, and it would depend on the age of your students, whether you have 4 of them, 20 of them, whether they have words or no words. But one of the systems you could use is for about a week, depends if it's older students, younger students, 1 period a day, but for about a week, a bell rings every, let's say, a gentle bell or chime, every 20 minutes. And all they have to do, this is not going to be handed in, is write down the face or the word of what they're feeling. That's it. So after doing this for a few days or a week, the discussion is, not what were your answers, but what did you find out? And you're leading them to recognize they could identify their emotions. That's an insight. That's a empowering insight to be able to know they were stressed, know they were angry, know they were frustrated. Again, just like the emotion wall, for many students, that insight is empowering enough without the intervention. The other thing that I've done is when I want them to know if their emotion is getting higher, if anger, frustration, stress is elevating, because they might say, okay, well, that's interesting, but for the next, let's say, 8 times, the bell would go off, they'd write whatever emotion they're feeling and look to see if it was the one they were feeling before. If it was, they just make an arrow. Is it hot more or is it less? And that discussion becomes such that they now realize, there are different degrees of it, and it does get worse. They're also going to see that it gets lower. So part of this mental exercise is such that I really felt bad, but now it's even a little better. So recognizing that there is hope even when it's high, but also if it's going up, that's when they want to use one of their mindful or visualization strategies that they have practiced to the point of it's automatic. So you can't just give them an instruction sheet and say, okay, when your stress is going up, pull out your thing about mindful breathing and follow the steps. They're not going to do that. So it means taking the time to practice. You might practice 5 minutes a day, one for 5 minutes a day for 5 days. How you do the mindful strategy building or which one you use is, many people have written about it. But what your plan is for them to be empowered with something, to have, they've learned a few things and practiced them with you to the point they don't need an instruction sheet, they know how they feel with it, and they're not calling attention to themselves by the strategy they've practiced that they choose to use, whether it's visualizing a calming memory or imagining a bubble around them to deflect hurtful words and actions, or other things to self-calm, mindful breathing, counting to 10, recalling a positive memory. As long as they've practiced it so that without anyone noticing, they feel the stress going up, they do it. Very empowering and successful, but I'm not going to go into any further with that because I want to talk about instructional interventions. But mindfulness, attention to the present moment with a non-judgmental attitude. Knowing about the amygdala and how it's programmed to stress out and to shut down and block learning is also important to dispel their bad self-image and to give them motivation to build their self-efficacy. High stress puts your brain in an involuntary state. It's not your fault that when it's in that state, it's programmed to stop building memories, and it's programmed to survive, to act out or zone out. 2 articles that you have links to are good. I mean, I know you would never do this, but one of them is teach students about their brain, and they're from Educational Leadership that I wrote, so you can copy them and use them. The second one, the paired one, what you should know about your brain. The second one, if you just read it, it's like 3 pages, read it aloud to students, I mean, that would not be the ideal way, and I'm sure it's not how you would do it. But it covers the big 3. It talks about neuroplasticity, which we'll do tomorrow. It talks about it's not your fault when your amygdala is doing the right thing to survive, and it talks about the attention filter. But ideally, students who are going to, your goal is to empower them to even try their behavior self-management, to know that they have to recognize that they're not defective. Their brain is doing the right thing. Here is some great examples. A 5th grade student describes his amygdala. So I'd love to say that everybody who does a seminar or a day with me sends me these great things, but this is one. Please do send me anything you have. This one is pretty awesome, but not typical. Okay, here's one from an AP English class. So even though Teach the Test California, she had them write and put on a skit. She does have a note at the end, so I'll tell you at the beginning that The students were responsible for the content. Any misinformation, you should ask a real doctor or a real person. But here, and plus it's a preview. It's going to activate some prior knowledge and preview, which is also important tomorrow from memory, things that we haven't discussed yet. With that, let's find out some of the rescue systems, the EMTs for this brains programming. Recalling, as if I haven't driven it home enough, but yeah, it gets stressed if it's too hard, too easy, and the survival programming. It's got limited resources and it's programmed to stay on the couch, to resist using these oxygen and glucose and activating these areas unless it's for survival or something it expects to be successful or pleasurable. So let's hit the pleasure button. The brain has a pleasure reward system that we can tap into to get it to resist its programming and sustain effort. Like the attention getters, it is not required that this happens for every learning experience. As you described, the inquiry, the project-based, the high interest-based, high relevance-based, doesn't mean that you have to then additionally tap in because it's going to be more intrinsic. But let's see what I mean by the system that you can tap into and you are already tapping into. To get their brains to put in and sustain effort, activate the dopamine reward system. So a dopamine detour. Dopamine, when you think about it, as sure as you go through your day, you think, how is my serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine doing? Hey, my acetylcholine. Yeah, as you think about dopamine, you think of it as a neurotransmitter. I know you don't think about dopamine, but when you do, most people think of it as a neurotransmitter. There's like 200 neurotransmitters, and they're the ones that carry information chemically in little boats from across the synapse. We'll get to that tomorrow. But as they said in their school video, there's another place where dopamine resides and another activity it does. There's deep in the brain, near the amygdala and on each side of the brain, in that emotional limbic system, there's a sac of dopamine, very rich in lots of dopamine, much more than you'd have at any synapse. And this little sac of dopamine releases lots of dopamine to bathe the brain. So this is not the dopamine that's carrying it across the synapse. It's more like a hormone or enzyme. It's like a brain bath. And it especially it releases it into the prefrontal cortex. That'll be important when we come to memory and mistakes. But here it's important because it feels good and the prefrontal cortex is going to do the most with that good feeling. It's a brilliant system. Now, dopamine, you're going to have it in a few minutes. You're going to experience, I'm going to make your dopamine go really high, then low, and leave it high again. But anytime you have this, what we call intrinsic satisfaction, intrinsic motivation, that's a chemical response to dopamine. It's not like the choir of angels that you just think is, yeah, but it's chemistry. Your brain is doing it. The response to the increased release of dopamine, when it's released out of this nucleus accumbens, across all mammals, and sometimes it has 3, 2, 4, it doesn't have to have all of these at once, but the general response, increased pleasure, attention, motivation, perseverance, and memory. It's a wonderful cluster, and doesn't mean dopamine is the good chemical, because excessive dopamine is schizophrenia. So don't worry, you'll never do that. You'll never do anything. I guarantee you, you can never do anything with the dopamine reward system of what we're describing that will provoke schizophrenia. You can, the things we'll talk about, you can do with schizophrenics and it won't cause any problem. But some people come away and say, oh, dopamine is a good neurotransmitter chemical. Everything in its place. Anyway, this system, and the pleasure isn't just like when you get a prize. The pleasure is a deep satisfaction, like that intrinsic satisfaction. It's like drinking water after a long thirst. It's very powerful. Now, here's a chance to see some of the dopamine boosters, ones that I feel really good about the research on. Some of them, it took a long time for me to vet it. But you'll be seeing things here, as I mentioned earlier, things that you already do that work, and now you know why they're working. But at the same time, when you see other things on the list that you haven't tried, you'll say, wow, there's 6 on there that I try. I'm going to give this other thing a try. So these are things that release dopamine, nice brain bath of dopamine. In some people, to different degrees, okay? Not everybody, not all the time. Listening to music, being read to or told a story or anecdote, humor, interacting with peers, movement, choice, optimism, kindness, gratitude. You're seeing some things on here that were on your best learning, but we'll come back to that. And particularly high power dopamine releasers in all mammals, particularly high, making predictions and achieving challenges. That's why I said challenging. Achieving challenges. And that's the most of the time when we feel that kind of intrinsic satisfaction. You had a goal, you worked for it. So, very high power. How are we going to tap into that? Well, first I want to give you a way to cement with multisensory and movement what are the dopamine boosters. And at the same time, I'll be demonstrating a preview of achievable challenge. When it's too hard, when it's too easy, one of the strategies for it. So we're going to do a brain toss. Stand up. You can use this for a review or for new learning. So everyone's standing up, and it's going to sound, it's a long explanation for the way to make it differentiated, but you don't have to tell this to the students because you'll be doing it. As I said, for review or for new learning, you're going to have this list of dopamine boosters. The differentiate, and you're going to name one when you catch the ball. But here's how it would work for people who want higher challenge, lower, appropriate challenge, zone of proximal development. Students who need this scaffolding could actually have the list in front of them. Students who want it sometimes, the list could be on a side wall. Students who want the higher level of challenge, because you're going to see the brain wants to do it with the challenge, not if it's too easy. So I will put them all up here because I didn't make sidewalls and private ones. The rules of the game also are scaffolded. You can say something someone else already said. You can read from the list and would be on the sidewall or in front of you or not looking at it. So you can repeat what someone else said. Here's the other thing that makes it comfortable. Everyone is standing up, so it looks like everyone's participating, but you can't throw the ball to someone after you catch it unless they're making eye contact with you. That way, if you really don't want to be involved, you're just looking down. So the whole class doesn't see that you're sitting down or running out of the room. You're just looking down. You're not making eye contact. So obviously don't throw the ball to someone who's not making eye contact with you. And I think that's about it. And after we do it, you will see how just this activity raises dopamine in about 7 of these ways. Okay, eye contact, comfortable throw, okay. So say one thing that boosts dopamine and then throw it to someone with eye contact. Okay, now watch how this one works. Stay standing up, but if anyone stays standing up after this prompt, I'll be surprised. But then with students. Maybe some students wanted to catch it and didn't get a chance to catch it. So at this point, at some point, you'd say, okay, if you still want to catch it again or first time, remain standing. Everyone else may sit down. So that's when, with adults, everyone sits down. With students, okay, so go for it. Who has the ball? Who has the brain? That's good, a little trauma there. Wait, you have to say something. Did you? It's not free play. All right. Good. You did it. All right. Okay, so notice the brain ball is good. They're like on Amazon, like 12 cents. But now, with a learning or a review with students, you wouldn't necessarily show them. But the other way I could do this is say, how did these things, I could just ask you to name ways from the dopamine list that activity boosted your dopamine, or I could ask you to say, well, the other prompt I could give you is, well, how is there optimism in that activity? And there'd be many possible right answers. Oh, I was hoping I would catch it, or I was hoping they would notice that I wasn't looking down. I expected a good outcome because I did remain standing, or I expected a good outcome of not having to catch it. So gratitude because it worked out. So you can, these are ways that activity is a dopamine booster. But I wanted to say, oh yeah, the prediction thing. We're gonna experience and do more about it. But I want to tell you, if the brain expects some dopamine because it's done something before, like the activity, maybe made a correct prediction, played a certain game, had an experience, it releases a little pre-burst of dopamine. It's so into getting its dopamine that it gives up a little to sort of prime the brain. Because you notice when there's dopamine floating around, you get the pleasure, but more motivation, effort, perseverance, and memory. So it's a little priming the pump. Okay, so take a 3-minute synapse. What strategies have you found useful that you now know are on the dopamine booster list? Or perhaps which ones do you now want to use from the list that you haven't? So I'll leave the prompt up and the list up. You can share for 3-minute synapse. Okay, so what activity sustains effort, motivation, perseverance, even when there are frequent setbacks, errors, and it keeps getting harder and harder, increasing challenge? Bet you know. Pull of video games. Now, I am not talking about using video games for teaching and learning, okay? I'm talking about the research. In trying to figure out what's going to get the brain off the couch, what can I do about dopamine? What is there, because with that fixed mindset? So the research on dedicated video gamers, so those who are whom they studied, the research on them revealed 3 main components, and it's all related to dopamine, 3 main components that made them persevere when they made frequent errors and setbacks, and that it kept getting harder. Those 3 components can be reconstructed in learning experiences to get the ideal response from the brain based on dopamine. So what is the pull of the video games? This is what, I'll show you how the research comes out, then you'll experience it, then I'll be specific. The 3 components are based on the brain expecting and wanting this dopamine pleasure. So of course we remember the 2 of the biggest releasers are making predictions and achieving challenges. Nail those, the video games that are the most compelling for the video gamers involve those biggies. So there'll be a loud noise in a minute. 3 components: buy into the goal, priming the dopamine pump. Meaning that the goal can be fantasy. When we start talking about strategies, you ask a video gamer, what happens when you get to level 10? Let's say a 10-level game. I save the world from a meteor that's going to wipe out humanity. You say, really? They'll say, of course not, it's a game. That's important. The sarcasm aside, it's important because fantasy for their goal buy-in is powerful. Doesn't have to be they want to take algebra so they can go take calculus and be a rocket scientist. That's not the buy-in that's going to work to get them off the couch initially. Meaningful buy-in. All right, next 2. Predictions, dopamine booster, and achievable challenge with frequent feedback. So here's what I mean. You're playing someone's playing a video game, a dedicated player. So I'm just not going to say that all the time because I want you to know that it doesn't happen to everybody who plays a video game. Not everybody likes them. But the science of it works in everybody. All right, the first thing is you start playing the game with 10 levels. You start at level 1. There's some task you have to master. If you master it right away, you go right to level 2. And the game doesn't say, wait, there's somebody playing in Japan, we have to wait for them to catch up. It's right at your mastery level. Same thing at level 2. If you can do it, you go right to level 3. What happens then when you get to, and also, yes, and if you're taking a long time at level 1, the game's not saying, boy, you're the slowest person in the class. Everybody else understands this game. It's very individualized, personalized, zone of proximal development, which is going to be very important for the brain. Predictions, and I'll come back to achievable challenge. What are they doing at the level that they finally have a task that they can't do? One that if a game plan is one that they'll keep playing, when they get to level 3 and they haven't mastered, they don't know exactly what to do, the game has to be designed in a certain way that they recognize what the task is and they recognize it is achievable. They recognize, well planned foundationally or built up so that the brain has to believe it has a chance with practice of achieving that challenge at that level. And indeed, the prediction opportunities are amazing in a video game because you get to make predictions and have no penalty but all reward, to the point that they can make, at their level of achieving new mastery, 80% of their choices, lining up letters in a code or shooting an arrow somewhere. At the mastery, at the new level they go up to, the games that sort of hit the sweet spot, about 80% of their initial predictions, choices, moves are incorrect. Why would they keep going? In school, if someone kept getting 20% on tests, we're going to hit fixed mindset. But here's the brain saying, I got nothing to lose, and I like the little dopamine bursts that are coming when I'm right. 2 out of 10 is fine with me because there's no downside. There's no embarrassment. It's like playing slot machine in Las Vegas. Maybe you get $5 worth of nickels. I know you don't really put money in anymore, but you pull the crank down and you might win some money, but when your nickels are gone, you're likely not to get another batch. But what if the cup kept refilling every time it's empty? Well, the brain likes gambling is making predictions. It's dopamine, and addictions become seeking more and more dopamine. In any case, they're making predictions, and the other part is immediate feedback. So they make a prediction up or down. They get immediate feedback, so at least 20% of the time, they get a little dopamine burst, they love it, and they're willing to make the next 8 ones incorrectly. No penalty, and they're going to get another one ultimately. Achieving challenge with frequent feedback. Now, they've got through level 3, they've mastered the task. The feedback is not only doesn't the prediction, the wrong prediction or choice, not only doesn't bother the brain because it knows there's no penalty, it has more, but in that state, in this model, they actually learn from the feedback rather than saying, I'm so stupid. The brain is saying, okay, I see why that was wrong. So it's an incredible brain state from the dopamine of the intermittent reinforcement. Okay, so now they finished level 3. They're getting a big feedback that they achieved a challenge. They don't have to wait until they're at level 10 or get their grade back on a paper. Level 3, there's a new avatar. It says, welcome to level 3, congratulations. It's very evident that they've made a progress on their path to saving the world from this meteor. And so as they achieve a prediction, you get little bursts, and as they get to another level in the challenge, there's immediate feedback. We can't give these things to students all of the time, but the video game does. So that system reconstructed in a classroom, getting the brain to resist its survival program through things we've learned from the model. Remembering limited resources resists effort. It's 2:27. Now I'll give you the break because when you come back, you'll really want the dopamine boost, and I promise it's going to be so fascinating. I love it. I mean, I feel it too. All right, so 2:45, and come back to feel the pleasure. Research on stress in the brain. I noticed a lot of you laughing about that teacher stress slide, so I'm a little concerned. So I'm going to do this test here. In a study on stress, subjects were shown a picture of 2 identical dolphins. Those suffering from chronic stress described differences between the 2 dolphins. The more differences they described, the higher was their physiologic evidence of stress. So I want you to check things out here. Take a look at the photograph and see if you see any differences. All right, well, my husband's a neurologist. He'll come back. You can line up. We'll see you after. Okay, so here's your turn to experience your dopamine neurologic instruction. Little ups, little downs, little surprises. Activate their dopamine reward responses with the game model to get their brains to engage and sustain effort. Too hard, too easy. We want the dopamine out there so they can construct not only memory, but enduring understanding, an extra bonus. Okay, so I will put up a question that I'll read it, then I'll take it away and give you instructions for how you will discuss it at your table groups. It shouldn't be in, you guys will definitely want to split into 2 groups or 3, because each person is going to have 10 seconds to give an opinion. Anyway, here's the deal. Here's the question. You're sitting in a raft in a pool of water. You can decide what's in the pink drinks. But there is a rock in the raft with you. If you drop the rock into the water and it sinks to the bottom, question is, will the pool's water level, which you can see on the side there, rise, fall, or stay the same? Now, here we go, some instructions. You'll see the logic in it after you do it. I'll explain it. You're going to discuss this with your partners, again, groups of 3 or 4, without using any numbers, no other units of measure, no math or science terms, no formulas, no names of Greek people. Off the table. Science folks, if this is something you're very familiar with, observe. I promise you'll have your share of aha moments, but do not try to guide or vote, because fun will be over. Unlike with students who would not have a time limit, I'm giving you a time limit. You have 2 minutes to do 2 things, and you'll see why these things are there. Everyone must share their idea in their group. You have 2 ways to share your idea of whether the level rises, falls, or stay the same, and they're both perfect. Either one gets you an A. Either the level, you can simply say, I have no idea, but I think it goes up. If I have to guess, I'll say down. But yeah, you have to guess, but you don't have to defend it. You don't have to you don't have to be right. You'll see in a minute. The other way you can share out your idea is to spend 10, 15 seconds saying why you think so. That's equally perfect and wonderful. One is not better than the other. Making a prediction, your choice, or taking a few seconds to describe it. But remember, if you are going to take the time to describe it, which is also great, follow those rules. No math or science terms, formulas, or units of measure. Okay, now in the 2 minutes, and that's why you'll have a 1-minute countdown clock, besides going around and sharing your predictions in your group, you're going to select a group consensus. It doesn't have to be by majority. It could, don't pick the person who's the science teacher, because that person shouldn't be guiding you anyway. But whatever your group consensus is, that's fine, but you're all going to be raising your hands for the same group consensus. You'll see the logic in it, because when I said it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong, your whole group's going to be saying the same thing. Maybe what you predicted, maybe what someone else. Whatever the group decides it's going to vote for, everyone's going to raise their hand. Okay? Any questions on the plan? Okay, here's your question. 2 minutes, I'll give you a countdown. Predict. You're all going to vote as a consensus. But first, was it an enjoyable problem discussion? Especially considering it was physics. Was it kind of enjoyable? I'm going to answer for you, yes. I mean, you discussed it. If I told you before, break that you were going to come back and discuss a physics problem, some people wouldn't come back. Some people would say, you wouldn't have expected to enjoy discussing a physics question, some of you, but you did. Your dopamine actually went up. Why? It was engaged. Buy-in. Remember the video game model? Prediction. The brain wants to make predictions on the chance that it'll be right and it'll get the feedback, or the chance that it'll be real, to revise it. Not only did your brain say, oh, a chance to make a prediction, that sustains because you knew that the answer was coming, so you are curious. And there was no negative consequence if your prediction or your group's prediction was wrong, because the consensus was there. So what your group is raising their hand for, especially students who never want to be wrong and don't want the teacher to know that they're wrong, but the mistake fear dissipates because it's a group vote. So you're not voting as an individual. You also had achievable challenge, several ways. Your zone of proximal development. each of you had different levels of background in this information, but there were variable participation options. I said it was perfect, it was fine, it was equally good to just make a prediction or to take your 10, 15 seconds and explain it. So with high mastery, that's a challenge. Just saying what you learned from a formula would not be a challenge. And to make the challenge valuable for the person with the foundation knowledge, they needed to explain it with understanding. Einstein said if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. So they had to do it. They couldn't just rely on a formula. And by having that rule in there, there was also discussion equity because they weren't throwing out words or formulas that other people without the foundation knowledge wouldn't understand, or English language learners wouldn't have understood. They've got to explain it simply, which is increasing their understanding and their challenge. So achievable challenge led to discussion equity and variable participation options. So pretty neat dopamine. If you need to know how your dopamine actually was, check this one out after you, well, first we'll vote. All right, vote as a group by standing up. Some people are reluctant to put their hand up if the group didn't say their idea and they think they're right, but you gotta do it. If your group's consensus, the whole table stands up, the water level rises. So if that was a consensus of your group, stand up. Okay, and I don't see, okay, and so you look around the room, you got about a third, thank you. The water level falls. Stay the same. Very nice. Okay, thank you. Have a seat. Oh. But check this out. Although your group's prediction was wrong, do you want to know why? Yes. Think how awesome I thought I was when I got this system for a question like this and I made it up. They didn't like physics to begin with. They certainly didn't want to learn about this stuff when they came into the room. And they got it wrong when they made their prediction. And yet, they wanted to know what I had to teach. That's when I thought I was awesome. I could do anything I wanted because they got it wrong and they wanted to know. I was wrong. You want to know why now. So I thought I could send them to the book or give a directed lecture. Let's see if your attention and motivation are sustained when I do to you what I did to them. Here's the book. Water level falls. The rock in the boat displaces an amount of water equal to its weight. At the pool bottom, it displaces water equal to its volume. Because the same volume of water weighs less than the same volume of rock, the rock in the water displaces less water, so the water level falls. Now, maybe you'd read it again, but do you really still care? You cared a minute ago. Do you still care? They didn't care. They wouldn't care. You don't care. So I deflated that thing as soon as I sent them to that. And not only did I deflate their interest that was so amazingly piqued despite getting it wrong, as you just experienced and as I predicted earlier today, unless your mind is engaged and you make something conceptual, like what we were talking about, it was something we were talking about this morning that I said understand it conceptually. Raise your hand if you ever took a physics course anywhere. Okay, look around the room. Almost all of you took physics courses. I took 2, and as I told you, the deal was in my head with every professor, give me it, I memorize it, you ask the same question, I give it back to you, I get my A, which is how I learned Archimedes, but we never really learned it. I know some of you got it right, so that's good for you, but it illustrates the point. We never really learned it because it was in every physics course we took. What happened? And why didn't it instantly, when I made up this question, why didn't it instantly come back to me, even on first reading? Now, granted, you could read it twice, but here is what happened in the brain. The dopamine reward cycle was pumped up. You had achievable challenge, you had buy-in, prediction, but the follow-up was incomprehensible input. Remember, I emphasized that the brain has to expect an achievable challenge. It has to be both a challenge and recognized at the new video game level as one it could achieve. My directed lecture, or that text, once it's perceived as not achievable, you know, your first instinct when we read it quickly, no, I don't get that, now I don't even care. So effort is not sustained, and I'll take myself as an example. You can decide if you qualify, but even if we memorized it, we didn't construct understanding enough to figure it out. I mean, I'm not going to assess what happened in each of your brains, but because understanding was not constructed, in my case, it was because I could just memorize it and parrot it back. But the reason we took stuff, answered questions on tests correctly over and over, and lost it because effort was not sustained enough. It was because we didn't construct our understanding. Sometimes because of effort, other times because we didn't have the opportunity to construct it. Here's a question, here's the answer, list this is right, this is wrong. Understanding has to be constructed for transfer of knowledge, for usable applications of information. So here's the ideal. This is not to show you what you must do for this whole system to continue to work after they make the prediction and get it wrong. What would make them stay with it? This is like in the ideal, but after I show you this magical world of an ideal, I'll show you in examples of buy-in, of achievable challenge, of feedback that are doable. This is certainly doable, maybe one lesson a semester and then build up. But here's what it would take. Lowering the barriers, not the bar. Individualized development of mastery so that students are all at their achievable challenge, all working at their Goldilocks zone. And I'll give you some examples. And flexible opportunities for knowledge building. Because for everyone to be at their achievable challenge, so the brain says, yeah, that's a challenge and I can achieve it, it means flexible opportunities. So flexible opportunities and ways of building knowledge with ongoing feedback of progress. So here's a amazing way to do it that takes way a lot of work, but I recommend it. Varying sources of knowledge building and progressive levels of difficulty that are known to the students. So for example, opportunities to look at media, websites, Khan Academy, digital texts, classroom texts that you can get for classrooms or online that are at different levels of complexity. Online learning games. The important thing is labeling them, level 1, level 5, and supporting the students by saying, you will all be at level 5 understanding by the end of this unit. I know you can do it. I'll provide the ways. How do we get, and by having the different sources, they get so many dopamine opportunities. They get some optimism, they get choice, they get feedback, because let's say and they get to be at their achievable challenge Goldilocks zone and change when they want to. So for example, if you had all these options and flex groups and for younger students workstations that said level 1 or level 2, they can start any place they want. They could start at level 5 reading if they want to. They could start at level 1 video. If they get it, if they succeed in understanding level 1, they can jump to 3. They can go change sources. But feedback is individualized because if they understood it and go up a level, the challenge continues, and they got the feedback. Great, like a video game. All right, I got level 3. Now I get to go to level 4. It's not an instant. It's not embarrassing. It's not comparison. Again, it's not easy. But the system where they have a variety of sources to get mastery, can switch back and forth and get the feedback because they indicate level 1 to 5. That's as close as I can think of. And I've thought of ways to do it for almost all subjects. But here's an example of a level 1 video of the Archimedes. And you'll notice it doesn't have science terms or formulas. It's a good level 1. So, fine, I understand that. I'll go to level 3 reading or go to level 2 video or website or Khan. That is an example of an idealized video game model reconstructed in a learning situation with the benefit coming from dopamine. So now I'll give you some specific examples of the three categories, because you don't have to do all three all the time, the buy-in, the predictions, the feedback. Do ones you can, add as you can. So buy-in, we had prediction, we had curiosity, other buy-ins, personal relevance. It's going to be what opens up attention because there's feedback after making a prediction, we're going to sustain attention to find out if they're right. The content perceived as comprehensible by having a choice of levels so that the challenge is perceived as achievable. That's where I went wrong by one textbook or lecture fit everyone. The brain is pretty smart. It likes its dopamine, but it doesn't like to get off the couch. So if it doesn't feel that this challenge is achievable, it won't keep going. Likes its dopamine, but it has to have a sense it's achievable. And feedback of goal progress. So let's see some examples of goal buy-in. And the links that I'll send you, or even if you just Google Judy Willis and say video game model, you'll find so many articles, links, videos that show dozens of buy-in, achievable challenge, frequent feedback strategies. I'll give you a couple of each, but they won't fit all of what you're doing. But I will let you all experience the power of prediction. You're going to need something to write on and write with. With students, this would be done, I did it with whiteboards, you can do it with clickers, but you're going to, and I won't really see what you're holding up, but with students you do want to see what they're holding up. Okay, so something to write on, something to write with. Here's the deal. Let's see if your brain needs to know if a prediction you make is correct. How much does the brain really care about this? All right, so this is independent work. You'll have a time limit, students wouldn't. Two things you have to write down and hold up. One, would you rather have the amount of money at the end of 30 days if you start with 1 cent and it's doubled every day for 30 days? So it'd be 1 cent, then 2 cents, 4 cents. Keeps doubling. At the end of 30 days, there'd be some money there. Would you rather have that, in which case you could write a cent sign? Or at the end of the month, would you rather get $500,000? That's one thing you're going to write down. You must write down two things. You'll win. Everyone who writes down two things will win something in terms of brain winning. You also must write down your estimate of the total amount there'd be at the end of 30 days of doubling, even if it's not your choice. Even if you're going to take the 500, what might be there? And students know when we would do this frequently, all must estimate. They know when we do this prediction and whiteboard thing, they're not allowed to write "I don't know" or question mark. I mean, there's a lot of motivation because of the dopamine and other things you'll see in a minute. So write down two things: your choice, cent or dollar sign, your estimate at the end of 30 days of doubling. I'm only giving you 20 seconds. The other rule is when you hold it up, keep eye contact with me until I acknowledge. Because with students, if they don't have eye contact, they're holding it up, they start waving it around, and it doesn't have the same impact. So hold up 20 seconds, and I won't really see it. I would see it in class. Like the video game model, you have nothing to lose. There's no risk. I won't see it, and you'll see how you'll win something by writing down the two things. Okay, got it? Yep, thank you. Yes? Yes. I'm saying yes and acknowledging it, but in a classroom, I would be nodding because some students that hadn't put it up yet would hear all these like yeses or thank yous and start feeling they're last. Got it. So eye contact is important, and acknowledgement. Thank you. Hold up any remaining predictions now. And I'll show you how in a class you'd know, even of 200 students, you'd have accountability. Okay. Okay, now the next topic here is the dopamine chemical formula. Now think about this. It's another one of these things. You know you're not really going to get the money. It's fantasy. Remember, buy into a goal can be fantasy. I'm saving the world from a meteor. And when I would use this in the context of a class, the students, if it's math class, they have a hunch that it's going to have something to do with exponential numbers and something they may not have cared about. But the brain has got to know. So, I will first show you, and then I'll tell you the strategies that make this work. $505 million on the doubling. So that's interesting. But it didn't have to be amazing. The prediction is what works. Here's why. Why did you need to know? Predictions. And the prediction means, the prediction dopamine thing, choices or answers not definitely known. To qualify as a prediction, to get the dopamine, it means you're not sure. If I gave all of you an arithmetic test, single-digit addition, and gave you papers back and you all got 100, no dopamine there. Because there was no challenge. Dopamine comes when you achieve a challenge. And that's part of the reason why students who already have mastery are saying, nothing in it for me here. Their brain is saying, yeah, you're right, it is boring and ridiculous because no dopamine coming. So predictions, not definitely known. What happened? The brain seeks the pleasure that rewards accurate predictions. Now, when I was asked before about do the predictions have to be accurate? What if they're not right? This system is particularly useful. First of all, the brain is fine because they no accountability if they're wrong, because just you see it. But when this is another use of this system is if during the class you ask some question to which there is not a single yes or no answer, like why did I bring my cat with the lime on its head? They make predictions at the beginning with their whiteboards, clickers, magic pads, and nobody's seen them, you've seen them. Throughout the class, as information is forthcoming about the lesson, they make connections. You give them a chance to, you let them discuss it in groups. But anytime they want to hold up their whiteboard with another prediction as they're getting information, you acknowledge it, you give feedbacks, and the learning becomes an opportunity to get a prediction right, to win. So it sustains interest in getting the predictions right. So predicting, using that system of prediction and feedback when there's no negative consequence, like in the video game model, no embarrassment, no embarrassment from being wrong, and you have a chance to change your answer anytime. Nice system. What else? Buy-in, I love it, because buy-in can be fantasy. It's just so cool how powerful fantasy is through all ages. So for example, they could come into class and you could have this video on. So fantasy is cool. Here's another one that you won't be able to probably do this coming year, but maybe you have some pictures. But buy-in from previous year students. It surprised me the main power of this strategy. But when a unit is about to begin, you have photos from the previous year or 2-year students doing anything they did in that unit of study where they weren't just sitting in their chairs, writing or sitting there. So if they're out of their chairs doing projects, skits, art, movement, group work, celebrations, as long as they're out of their chair, it's worthy of a picture. What happens then? The unit is starting the following year, and that's the day you put up the previous year's pictures. Even better if you have some products that they did. So they come in the room, and they say, do we get to do that? Yeah, not do we have to do it? Well, because the people there seem a little bit engaged. So the buy-in starts with that. But the bigger buy-in that surprised me was the peer power. They would see the students who have cachet because they're a year older or 2 grades ahead. And they'd say, oh, look, I know that person. Or, oh, that's somebody who's cool or athletics. They would relate to the person, and that would make the activity even more powerful. Even beyond that, some of them would go and see the person in the picture in the yard or at lunchtime and discuss it with them, something they wouldn't tend to do. So collect your photos. Again, I'm just giving you a couple, but note-taking, note-making. It makes the note-taking more memorable, and from the beginning, and when I said the people in that class who wrote what it reminded them of, did better in the course, remembered the information, and stayed in science longer. So simply folding the paper, what they called hot dog style, and they can be taking their notes on a movie, on a lecture, on what they're reading in a homework book, but they also get to choose for dopamine and personally make it relevant by on the next to the note they take, this reminds me of, or I want to know more about, or I'm confused about, or draw a sketch of it, something that they want to write down. Note making makes it personally relevant. Achievable challenge. Definitely necessary for the brain. For example, this cat is like many students in math with word problems. You have 4 pencils and 7 apples. How many pancakes will fit on the roof? Purple because aliens don't wear hats. Some of you see a word problem and get that same thing. To me, it's like a train leaves Albany at 3 o'clock, right? 70 miles an hour. So where do they meet? Like, I hope they crash into each other and never leave again. So students live up to the expectations of their teachers, high or low. We started that unit, that example that I had about the Archimedes. You will all be at level 5. How you get there is your choice. Certainly emphasizing specifically and repeatedly for fixed mindset and for people who found things boring or irrelevant for each unit, because the brain needs boosting to remember and believe how your expectations for their success and how their interests will be part of how they learn and their strengths included in the assessments. I'm serious about repeating it. It may be 7 months into the semester, but if their buzz topic or assignment comes up, they're going to need you reinforcing. For those of you who know this, we're going to have this enrichment activity, or there's going to be these scaffolds, or yes, it's going to be navigation in it, just the way there has been every time something related, because the brain needs ability to get through the initial resistance. Another way to do it is making evident, like a video game, achievable segments en route to the final goal. This is valuable at any level. It's also important when you're teaching a college course or an AP course, because frequently the first day of those classes, you remember from college, this is the unit, these are the subtopics, this is when your paper must be, and this is the final grade. And first of all, the topics sound hard, and you're starting to get consequences right away. You don't have the paper in time, it's 90% of your grade, you don't. So it's not a real achievable challenge, it's like alienating. So, for example, if a textbook on geology, but I'll also show you with math. You take the subtitles, or if it's a course where you're showing them what the units are, write the original, the first day, I would write the original, all of them in one column, and the revised right next to them to make their brains recognize achievable challenge. For example, the first section in the glacial geology was ablation. I wrote, I think I just lost face. Continentality. Are the ocean and I getting closer together? Glaciation. How long was your last growth spurt? My last one lasted 10,000 years. I can understand that. Words problems. First of all, by calling words story problems. Now, their book won't have the fancy words, but the teacher's guide or the curriculum will. So I show them original revised. Diagrammatic representation. Yeah, that's what you're going to do first. You know what that means? Draw it. Math vocabulary search. What is it asking me to find out? Information analysis. What is it already giving me? That's very empowering. Or at least not, it's showing the brain, hey, it's an achievable challenge. And here's one I also liked, even found useful even for older students. We so frequently say break it down. But it's really nice to have a concrete experience of understanding something by breaking it down. So if you save some broken toys or appliances or get some at a thrift store that are non-repairable, give these out age appropriately to table groups and make it sure that they know they're not accountable for any report or anything other than exploring. So you would say, okay, you have this thing, this watch on your table. Discuss amongst yourself how you think it works. You don't have to write anything down. So they discuss it for a while. Then you say, okay, take it apart. You won't have to put it back together. Just take the thing apart. As they're taking it apart, they will start saying, that's a spring, that's a dial, that's a battery, that's a rubber band. They'll start seeing for themselves recognizable parts in the whole. And simply that, simply that opportunity makes it concrete. When you say break it down, it's not just yada, yada, yada. It's, yeah, I did find things when I took it apart. Okay, noise will come back. The next two are specific to reading comprehension because that's often a challenge for any subject area. First one I made up, students loved it, and it was a solution to a problem I thought about for a long time. But it applies to any subject areas, and it involves Post-its, even if they own the books. But we all know what helps reading comprehension in general. You can make the list of the things that we know, making predictions, activating background knowledge, personal connections, looking at and evaluating the charts or the graphs or the pictures or the diagrams. All of these things increase reading comprehension, but I couldn't figure out how to make students do it or be accountable for doing it, especially if I wasn't there. Here's what I came up with. They'd get Post-its, and they loved it because they called it no homework eventually, because they only had to write a few words on the Post-it at home. In class, I'd pick the prompts that they would write on their Post-it. It ended up that I was only using about 10, certain ones each time, so they were also on the wall, and I could say, write on your Post-it 1, 7, 5, and 8. So one they would be writing, for example, I think you'll be telling me about. And they're going to be putting it in their book as they do the reading, and finish the sentence. I think you'll be making a prediction. I already know things about you, so I predict. Now they're activating all those reading comprehension prompts accountably and fun. This reminds me of, putting it somewhere in the chapter. Sometimes you want them to have 3 of the same one. They're personalizing. Another Post-it will say, this is similar to what I learned before, activating prior knowledge. Select one of the pictures, graphs, diagrams, and they have the Post-it. I would have preferred a picture of, or they can actually make what they think is a better sketch diagram or download one from the internet. So they actually are interacting with the part of the page that otherwise they say, oh good, less reading. These things are increasing contact with text and increasing comprehension. Here's another one for comprehension of complex text that gives them really fast feedback that they're doing better. And they like it because there's no kind of required, you don't have to look things up. So for this, they need Xerox information. I didn't make this one up, and it really worked with me with poetry, which I thought was so annoying. Why don't you just say what you want and not make it obscure? But with this system. So whatever level they're at, you give them something that's complex text that they can highlight. They're going to underline the parts they understand with each of 3 readings. First time with yellow, then blue, then green. Doesn't matter on the colors, but highlighting is usually, you look at it and say, oh man, I don't know a lot of this stuff. This time, highlighting is positive feedback right away. Now, the first time, they might not have much highlighted, but guarantee, this is to tell me it's time to let you process. So some people have more, some people have less, but guarantee by the second reading, they'll highlight more. First of all, they've reread it. They've had context clues, so they have more ways to understand what they read. They'll have more. Third reading, they'll have more. I mean, maybe not everybody, but when I've used it, they have more. So watch what happens. So it might look like this, a few phrases, a few more, and more. But the color is the feedback, and they might have this much progress, they might have much less. But the outcome is individualized self-feedback of progress. If you have 3 colors, you haven't had to look anything up, you haven't had to find vocabulary words, you did better. And they're going to experience the value of rereading, because you can say it all day, but now they see that it worked. So frequent feedback of incremental progress. The video game is giving it to them. Unless the brain, this nucleus accumbens, gets that they've made progress en route to the goal, it's not going to fix that fixed mindset right away. Students need to make the connection between their effort and their goal progress, especially when they have the fixed mindset and feel hopeless about it. A couple of examples: analytic rubrics with, not that the way you're going to make the assignment, but so they can look at advance and see one place where they think they can improve. This is for the person who wants an A and not a B, or a person who thinks I can never write an essay or do well on a math test. So pick one place where you think you can go from wherever one level to the next level. Then when they, hopefully along the way, whatever the assignment might be, when they periodically get back their rubric where you've now circled the area they were working on. And some kids need a lot of time with you to even believe they can go from the worst to one higher. But sometimes for the first time, they recognize progress in an area where they'd given up. So this is giving them ongoing feedback. Little feedback is critical for small improvements at first. There's a website in your handout. It's called Online Chart Tool. It works. There's ones for kids that are pre-reading, pre-literacy, all the way up, different types of graphs. The bottom line is you want them to recognize their own progress. You could have, let's say, vocabulary index cards, multiplication tables. But when people first get their things that they're going to put effort into, like 5 minutes a day practicing these cards, they're going to individualize them. They're going to get the 20 because they've pre-checked the pre-test. They're going to get 20 that they don't already know. Not everybody's going to start with the ones times table. So we'll have people starting at their achievable challenge level, and with your guidance, or if they're independent, plotting the time they spent doing this task with the number that they got right when they tested themselves each day. Now, what's cool is some students, if they choose to share it, will see their slope as high as a smartest person. They'll see progress. They won't all be linear, but do not assume that that's done for their brain. The discussion needs to be the insight. Even though I called them effort to goal progress graphs, they had to actually have the aha. Oh, so I put in more effort, more studying, and I did better. It's not, it doesn't automatically conceptually work for some students. So let me conclude this part and give you some time to process synapse and takeaways. Learning needs to be in the range of students' achievable challenge. I think this assignment is outside of the range, but you decide. So, concluding and then more active from your side. Neurologic success progression. Challenge is achieved. So challenge, remember, the brain has to recognize a challenge and get feedback that it's achieved en route. Feedback of making incremental goal progress. We'll get the growth mindset, the sustained effort. My effort and practice can and do increase my abilities. The outcome, persevering in the face of difficulty, open to trying new strategies, and take on higher challenges. It works. But I do want to say something. Teaching is not brain surgery. I've done brain surgery, and I've done teaching. Teaching is definitely harder, and I'm not exaggerating or making that to make you feel good. Brain surgery is like changing a tire or cutting and sewing a pattern. They don't let you do it until you've watched it so many times and you've held the clamp so many times and you've done the little incision part. So by the time you get to do it, you've done it so many times that it's automatic. You could do it in your sleep, except when there's a complication. So all of that training is critical when there's a complication, if the nerve or artery is in a weird place or if the brain is mushy. So if there's a complication, fine, it's interesting, it's challenging. But routinely, it's not even that much interesting because it's always the same. But for teachers, every moment matters. Every student, every day. A change in the lighting, a change in who they're sitting next to, a change in the assignment. You can see, if you have the time to look, that throughout these minor or major changes, there are minute-to-minute changes in how they're doing, emotionally and academically and understanding. And what makes it extra hard is you perceive this. You're going through things and you can see a student, oh wow, I can tell that he's a little confused. As soon as we break for practice, I'm going to go work with him. Or I see that person's putting in a lot more effort than usual. I'm going to make sure to let them know. And so you have all of this stuff, but the minute is now continuing to go. So you're making this list, but it's an unending change in other students. I write for The Guardian, it's a newspaper in England, for their education or teachers, and they so often ask me to write about teacher stress. But the one that I found most interesting or poignant was they said, a study here in England showed that of all professions, teachers get the least sleep. Why is that? Again, it's not quite neuroscience. I can give you opinions, but not a specific study. But here's what I would think is going on. There's like a Rolodex. All those things, those moments that build during the day, who you wanted to talk to, who needed you, got confused, who you couldn't do everything at once. You go to sleep at night, and you have this like film loop of those moments. So you say, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll be sure that. But tomorrow, there's a whole new world and life and activity and emotions. You can never catch up, and your brain and the sleep is going to pay the price or burn out. So here's a suggestion. Start with your own achievable challenge and use your dopamine. Think about extreme students, the most act out or the most zone out. And if you're not sure, and I don't mean to be cynical, but for me it would be the students sometimes if they were absent, things would go better. But that experience, that student, starting with that student and as much as you can personalizing, customizing the experience so that student is experiencing success by an achievable challenge, interest related in learning, as homework that's achievable challenge, feedback, as much as you can for one student, not blatantly in front of the whole class, but planning for early obvious success. What will happen if that's the student who somehow the students, other classmates notice? What they will notice is, hey, things are a little better today, and the kid isn't absent. They'll recognize some progress or less disruption or concern about that student. And they, since you chose an extreme, the students who are having trouble might be saying to themselves, if he or she could get more with it or be answer questions, whatever it was, I can too. So that will increase the buy-in for others. It will also, or expectation of success. It will also give you more time to be with the others if the one who takes the most time is now more responsive. But use a system to alert you to success, whether it's a whole class system of having whiteboards or clickers, whatever you're implementing, in advance think of what will be reflective of your success. Because you're not going to have time to look at checklists and make them up after. By writing down before what you expect could happen, the noise level might go up because they're more engaged, might go down. Questions, there may be more questions, but they won't be on how many pages does it have to be. They might be discussion relevant questions. So what are you hoping for? What do you think you might see? That way, without taking extra time, your brain will be tuned into what challenge might I see, progress being made in, and your dopamine will be released, and that will give you the perseverance to go to the next step, to do more. But it really does take you taking the time to recognize how you're going to make success and planning just like you would for a student for early evident progress. Otherwise it becomes not just harder than brain surgery, but something you want to drop when people want to drop out from teaching. So, a chance for questions, a review, preview, prior knowledge activator. We're going to revisit your best learning experience. To get all those terms, let's just see what happened. I'm going to let you match your best learning experiences with things we talked about today. Video game model and dopamine boosters. and let's see how they align. I didn't take any away. I chunked them a little bit, but if you look at it, if you can see it, all of your best learning experiences are on one side, your left, and the dopamine boosters, followed by the video game model. Buy-in, personal relevance, some of the examples like photos that were up there, and achievable challenge, mastery-based, self-paced learning, and feedback of progress en route to the goals. So see at your group if you can link the a best learning experience with something on the dopamine booster or the achievable challenge. I could find multiple for each one of them. That's why I was so proud of you guys that you just kind of nailed the dopamine and video game model in your best learning experience. But take the time, a couple of minutes, to make the links, and should you choose, you can combine, I'll put the slide back, but you can, and a video I'll show you, but you can also add to that your takeaway, a new application. First is going to be seeing, oh, this raises dopamine. That's why it works. Why it was such a great learning. But then you might go back to the list and say, yeah, I agree that personal relevance was important, but how can I do that more for my challenge unit? So you can add, you can do that on your takeaway list, features of neurologic education, or any other way you will remind yourself to, or right now actively do, not in the future, right now, apply something you've learned to something new by transfer. So I'll put back the list of best learning dopamine and video game model as a prompt to discuss how they relate, and follow it by your making some takeaway plan. And then we'll have questions and another video. So the first sections from today, the preview for tomorrow about related to memory, how is it going to stick? Tomorrow's going to be memory, also lots of aha, whoa, really, surprises. But now, Ned said you can go ahead with your planning. You will not hurt my feelings in any way if you need to be independent. Give your brain a break. Go outside. Don't do it at all. You will benefit by doing it, but take care of your health. Remember, stress, neurology. You know, I have a limited number of, I don't know, Darvon pills. So you just, if it's time for you to leave, you can leave. But I'll stay here. You can do what Ned said. What are you going to do with what you've learned that makes it relevant and take away? You can do that, or ask questions. You can ask group questions first, and then if that's not happening, you can ask individual questions. So choice, takeaway,